welcome to the Psychohealthology Summit 2018. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Dr. Eva Detko, and my guest for this session is Nikki Gretrix, one of my favorite people at the moment. Nikki is a transformational coach and an award-winning nutritional therapist, and as well as that, a bioenergetic practitioner, helping people to optimize their energy. In 2005, Nikki co-founded one of the largest mind-body clinics in integrative medicine in the UK, with patients in 35 countries, where she worked as a director of nutrition until 2010. The clinic specialized in treating chronic fatigue syndrome, and the results with patients at the clinic on the nutritional protocol that Nikki designed were later published as a preliminary study in 2012 in the British Medical Journal Open. Nikki has spoken on over 20 online health summits, I'm sure it's more by now, and has been the keynote speaker at live conferences internationally. Nikki writes regularly for a range of health magazines in both the UK and the US. I'm saying it's more because Nikki, of course, has been here before with us during the Autoimmune Vitality Conference recently. And here she is again talking about a very exciting topic indeed, which is bioenergetics. So Nikki, welcome to the summit, and great to talk to you again. And thank you for being here and contributing yet again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be part of your events. I always enjoy our interviews and I'm happy to support what you're doing on such important topics. So great to be here.
And the topic today is hugely exciting, and I am super passionate about this, and I know you are as well. And I just wanted to remind people, perhaps if people who are watching, if they've seen Autoimmune Vitality Conference, then they may remember that we did actually have a session on bioenergetics with Dr. Gerald Smith. But at that point in that session, we were focusing on targeting chronic infections. So we were talking about bioenergetics in that context. But today, we're actually talking about it in a slightly different context, because, of course, we're talking about the links between the energy field and the thoughts and emotions. And, of course, that there's just so much information there. So do you want to just go ahead and actually perhaps define, first and foremost, just in case people don't know or don't remember, what is bioenergetics? And, of course, what is this human energy field that many people these days keep referring to?
Yeah, so bioenergetics is the study of energy in living organisms, and it tends to be more governed about sort of with the science of physics as opposed to biochemistry. So, normally when we talk about supplements and kind of organs and hormones and things, we're at the biochemical level or the molecular level. When we talk about bioenergetics, we're going actually not only down from molecules down to a single atom, we're talking about subatomic level. And the truth is, we have trillions of cells in our body and we all have subatomic particles in our bodies. So why can't you change your biology at that structural level? You can change biological expression at the subatomic level. And there's overwhelming evidence that that's the case now. Just to give an example, so if we bioenergetics being the study of energy in living organisms, just consider light, for example. So the power and the importance of light in terms of how the body, we actually run off light. We are charged by light. We don't just get our energy from food and proteins and carbs and fats. There is overwhelming evidence that photons of light from the sun are absorbed into the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cells, and are converted into ATP for energy. We actually are beings that run off light and off the sun. And for example, I think there's over 5,000 science papers now showing the efficacy of low-level laser therapy for all kinds of chronic complex illnesses, for reducing inflammation. And the reason for that is that one of the understandings is that it looks like the mitochondria absorb photons of light. So we are light converters. We move away from particles and more into waves. So this is where often when we talk about bioenergetics, we're talking about changing the biochemistry through what we call resonance. So resonance is a really important concept in bioenergetics, where basically if you think about soldiers marching on a a bridge, if all the soldiers march exactly in unison on a bridge, they actually cause a resonant wave, and they can cause the bridge to collapse. So it was known in the war and so on, when soldiers were marching, they had to march out of unison on a bridge. We've all experienced being on a swing, when you're on one of these swings in the playgrounds, and you can actually, it's through resonance that you swing your legs, and that is, you're making the kind of deep, you're swinging more and more. That's resonance. So, and you think about tuning forks as well, when you sort of ding a tuning fork, and it will, through resonance, the waves of sound will make another tuning fork also resonant. So we can, basically, there are subatomic particles in our cells that can be manipulated, can be changed through resonant frequencies, whether we're using light. So we can use light to shake up the cells for healing. It's the same with I talk a lot about pulsed electromagnetic frequencies as well. These are just examples because there's loads of science behind them. But Earth has a frequency. It has frequency waves, natural waves. It's called the Schumann resonance, is one of the Earth's natural frequencies, electromagnetic frequency. And amazingly, the Schumann resonance, which is actually, it's about 7.83, I think, around there, it's maybe at the 10 hertz level. That's actually alpha waves. It's where when the brain is in alpha wave, the human brain is in alpha waves. It's amazing. It's the Schumann resonance. So it's just that, like, to me, this is the Goldilocks principle. It just turns out the Earth is exactly set up to support optimum human life, right? But again, if we don't get Earth's resonance frequencies, we die earlier, we go insane. And it's been proven with the astronauts, when they get away from Earth, they would deteriorate. So you have to have what's called PEMF devices on, are used by the astronauts. PEMF is pulse electromagnetic frequency. So it's another one of these things. These frequencies are essential for life. Light is essential for light. Frequency is essential for light. And in fact, there are almost 5,000 science papers showing that pulsed electromagnetic frequencies will heal all kinds of things. It's a massive part of stimulating stem cells. So there's a massive NASA research showing that human neural cells could be stimulated by pulsing electromagnetic frequency at the cells. And they got a 4-fold increased risk of new stem cell regeneration. And they turned off all these aging genes and turned on loads of anti-aging genes. So we are profoundly energetic beings. We're not just biochemical beings. And then I always use those examples because you can just go and look up the science papers just for starters. But in terms of a field, there's also something really interesting about this as well. This is a little bit more Russian and German research. They're a bit ahead of the game. Like the US is like the world leading experts in biochemistry, whereas Russia, Germany kind of are the experts in physics of the body and of health. And for example, the work of Fritz Albert Popp, who is a theoretical physicist, he actually found that DNA absorbs and sends out photons of light. And there are people like Nobel Prize winners who like bow down to his work, even though he was like seen as, a heretic, as people always are when they're doing pioneering research. I always talk about, there's an amazing study that was done by a leading researcher called Vladimir Poponin. And he was a research scientist at the Russian Academy of Sciences. And basically him and his partner, they shone laser light at DNA that was inside a quartz crystal. So they had the DNA, physical DNA, inside a quartz crystal, and they shone laser light at it. Anyway, when they took the physical DNA away, there was a spiral of light exactly matching the DNA strand. So we have trillions of DNA molecules in our body. So there's your light body. Anybody who thinks they don't have a light body, it's right there. You can just shine a laser light and DNA absorbs the light. So this is part of, they even think that about mitochondria, by the way, as well, that it may be that adenosine, which is part of adenosine triphosphate, ATP, seems to do the same thing. It absorbs light. And it is this light that's being transduced, it's being absorbed and possibly sent out by DNA and various cells in the body. is providing a kind of communication network. So this field around the body is on some level telling the biology what to do. So if there's a corruption in the energy field, that is going to directly negatively impact the biology as well. The 20-30 years of research by HeartMath have shown that we have a field around the heart, an electromagnetic field around the heart that stretches out about 15 feet, and it's 100 times stronger than the field around the brain. Just that alone is another example of the field, the evidence for fields around the body. And the amazing thing is, in conventional medicine, some of their diagnostic tools, MRI scans, CAT scans, PET scans, all of that some of that directly uses quantum physics. They are diagnosing with physics, and yet we're still treating people with drugs that are biochemistry. But you're diagnosing with physics and kind of, we're looking at the very signs of life is a heartbeat, which is electrical. So we're electrical beings, and we have a bioenergetic field around us. And the interesting thing is, and this is where it gets awesome, is not only can you therapeutically work with the energy field by things like low-level laser therapy and pulsed electromagnetic frequency, it just turns out that human consciousness has a direct interaction with this field. And there's profound research showing that. One of the things that's really interesting is I talk a lot about emotional trauma, and especially emotional trauma in childhood, and I've spent a lot of time researching that area. And in truth, when we think about what a memory is, or what thoughts are, or what emotion, and where do they exist? Where do they exist in the body? Do they exist in the brain? Are memories existing in the brain? There is zero evidence for memories existing in neurons in the brain or between the neurons in the brain. There's no evidence at all. And even though we know emotions and things have a biochemical imprint on the body, they can affect the biochemical expression, it can affect epigenetics, it also directly affects the nervous system. It also probably most likely, thoughts are kind of electrical and feelings are kind of electromagnetic. And there's an amazing neuroscientist. It was Carl Pribram. He's unfortunately passed away in 2015. But he basically said memories are stored in the field created by all the neurons in the brain firing together. So, and the information, the memory is stored in that field around the brain. So this, because people have lost huge parts of their physical brains in like illnesses and accidents, and they still have memory, they still function just fine. And there's research behind that. So obviously memory, who you are as your memories and thoughts, are actually also existing in the field, you don't just exist in your neurons. So trauma and emotions and thoughts and feelings are part of the field, and they're also directly interacting with that field. And I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. It's a fascinating area. And yes, you're quite right. I mean, this research has been around for a really long time, but initially all this information was reserved for the military and astronauts, and it wasn't so much in the public domain, whereas now we can tap into all this and obviously enjoy the health benefits of what it can offer us. So let's actually elaborate a little bit more on the connections between the energy field, the thoughts, the emotions, and the physical body as well, and how they kind of interconnect, and how by affecting one thing, we sort of affecting the others.
Yeah, so this is where it gets really interesting, because can human intention, could that change the biology? Now, we know we've got things like the placebo effect, and that might be somewhat reflective of the fact that human consciousness is somehow interacting at the quantum level and changing biology. There are various theories around placebo effect, but there has actually been like published research showing very clearly that human intention can influence subtle energy. So I talk about the work of, it was Professor Robert John, who was the Dean Emeritus of the School of Engineering and Applied Science. And he was director of what's called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. It was the PAIR research. I love this research. This was actually, it first came to me when I read Lynn McTaggart's book, The Field. She covers it in that book. And it really is one of the bits of that book that just stuck with me. Like, it changed my perspective. And basically, those experiments, what they did was they used random event generators, which were computers just producing zeros and ones, and they were called random event generators. And what they had is volunteers, human volunteers, that when they would press the button to produce these zeros and ones that should have been random 0, 1, they asked the people doing it to set an intention for there to be either more zeros or more ones. So they'd press the button, and it was unequivocal. They would press the button, I want more ones to be produced. And their consciousness interacted with this computer and the digital output, and they produced either more ones or zeros in line with human intention. So that was one form of the research. It's also, there's peripheral kind of research where you just have to look at some of the most studied science papers ever are in the realm of quantum physics, and how it is absolutely understood and known that the observer in these quantum physics experiments would affect the outcome. So depending on whether there was a human observing the results or not would affect the results, which was totally weird, but clearly shows a role that you know, what's happening at the quantum level is not as separate from our own consciousness. So this was where I kind of got really interested. I've always been interested in consciousness studies, and I was very into the mind-body sort of picture of things, right from when I first co-founded the clinic, when I got into kind of being a health practitioner. And it was this kind of work that got me interested in it. So the evidence is there that is definitely occurring. I think we are vastly underestimating the importance of setting intentions. Like, say we want to overcome a health condition, setting an intention, a clear, committed intention with a high resonant emotional energy behind that, including visualizing and focusing on what you want, not what you don't want, has a profound impact on the body's ability to heal, because you are affecting what's going on at the subtle energy, and the subtle energy is profoundly impacting the biochemistry. Now, it takes time, and it takes focus, commitment. It takes a degree of emotional mastery. It takes a degree of attentional mastery as well. But I think it's one of the most underestimated factors. But it ties back to other things like emotional trauma, because it got very simplified. There was that movie that came out quite a few years ago called The Secret, and it was I kind of not really a fan of the movie because it was oversimplified and it was dumbed down. And it kind of supported this narcissistic view that, oh, you know, your thoughts create reality. To a degree, this is true. Our thoughts create reality. And the truth is, to a degree, we are creator beings. We are creator beings, and we are co-creating our physical body as we are thinking and feeling. And to a degree, that is extremely true, and people are vastly underestimating that and vastly underutilizing this innate tool that you have. If you start recognizing that, wow, I have this illness, I created it, and if you take that responsibility, you can uncreate it through your intention, your optimistic, enthusiastic, high emotionally state of being. So in what I do with my work with clients, all of that's really important. Being in a positive emotional state, visualizing, setting an intention, doing that every day. And it might take 6 months before it might take 3 months before you even start to notice a physical difference, because at the subtle energy level, you've got cells dividing, right? And you're bringing in the new information, you're bringing in this new information that you've set at the quantum level. That new information is coming through, and the cells have to divide, and they have to build new tissues, they have to build new organs. So it's not a quick fix, although it can be sometimes. It can be phenomenal quick fix for some people, especially if you maybe correct a distortion in a field that suddenly that distortion's gone. So you've got this huge innate power But one of the biggest problems when somebody says, well, I set my intention, I set an intention to have optimum energy and optimum health, and it hasn't come about. The biggest block to that working is usually unconscious, unresolved childhood trauma. So this is where you get the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. This is how I got into talking about adverse childhood events and how we are at epidemic levels. So people need to think of it as an iceberg and see the tip of the iceberg is your conscious mind. And our conscious mind is there setting this intention. You could write it down, you could write affirmations, you could do visualization, and that is part of it. But what sabotages it is all the unconscious stuff. And often it's when people set this high emotional, positive view that it brings up, excuse my French, but it kind of brings up the crap. It'll bring up everything unlike that. And that's part of the healing process. So as soon as you set that intention, you'll probably get everything the opposite coming up. And this is what sabotages people. People don't understand about how energy works, how setting intentions work. Yes, you're going to have everything the opposite coming up because that's what needs to be purged so that your intention and your high emotional state can actually be the predominant energy affecting the biochemistry. So people often drop off through that. They don't understand how the body then heals when you're working energetically. So sometimes the body will have an increase of symptoms, often in the organs in the reverse order that the symptoms were originally experienced. All of that stuff, and a lot of other stuff as well, will have people drop out. They'll say this doesn't work. They'll lose trust, and then they build up trust wounds. And then they get into fear. And then if you're in fear about your health, you are putting in your timeline in front of you. Fear is you're putting the thing you're worried about exactly in your timeline in front of you to manifest, because what you focus on is what you get. So that's what's happening at the quantum level. If you're focusing on everything you don't want, it'll give you that. That's how it works. If you're focused on everything you do want, it'll give you that. Because that's how it works. It's not taking you personally. It's not trying to make your life miserable. It just is delivering you what you're focusing on. And that's what the intention experiments really showed. So, and what quantum physics is potentially showing. So this whole thing, this is what I've been studying for 20 years. And it's also why I originally ran this summit in 2015, this Abundant Energy Summit. And I collaborated with somebody called Ken Wilber, who's basically the greatest theoretical psychologist ever. He's he's written 20 books, and Deepak Chopra calls him the Einstein of consciousness, because he's been addressing this years ago, all the physics stuff, and we think, oh, it's all new stuff. No, it's really been started in the probably 1960s. And one of the things that Ken Wilber talks about is there's more going on. It's not as simple as just okay, we're setting this intention. Then there's all this crap that comes up and all these things that are going to knock you off, that are kind of where you're going to lose trust. But we live in a social environment, and we live in a cultural environment, and all that stuff's impacting you as well. So there's a lot of things going on. You don't exist in a vacuum. And so he had something called integral theory, and that's been my guiding framework in everything I do, because he was addressing exactly this thing. He's like, look, we are co-creators to some degree, but we've also got all these other millions of people on the planet who are all contributing to mass consciousness that's impacting our beliefs and thoughts. And it gets fascinating when you start looking at cultural beliefs around a specific illness, for example. The cultural beliefs can have a massive impact on somebody's recovery ability, whether they're recognized or not, or whether there's a stigma like HIV and what happened with chronic fatigue syndrome. Those kind of cultural stigmas, making people feel unseen, isolated, and like they're making it up, or that they're dirty or something like this, that suppresses the immune system. It allows the illness to take off. So it's the stigma. Illness doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It exists in a cultural and a social environment. The social environment are more the external things like your exposure to sunlight, quality of water, quality of food, even internet access. How important is that for health? Having people have internet access. People don't think there's a revolution that's happened with people just being able to get information through having an internet, revolutionizing health right now. Money, finances, that if you need to get treatment, you have no money. does that affect your outcome? Of course it does. So, and even also just the physical body affects how we think and feel. We mustn't forget that. So, for example, if somebody's got dysbiosis in the gut, we know it makes them, can make them more anxious and depressed. So, or if they have a condition called pyroluria, so it's a metabolic imbalance where they're essentially peeing out all their zinc, magnesium, and vitamin B6, that increases anxiety levels. We know if somebody's eating a diet where their blood sugar's all over the place, they're going to have roller coaster energy, and they're going to be jittery, irritable, anxious. So it's all affecting your emotional state as well. Here's the thing though, what causes all those things, the gut problems, the metabolic imbalances? Emotional stress. So it's a bi-directional relationship. So once you understand that everything affects everything, you get away from this oversimplified idea that you can create your reality like some narcissist who can, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But ultimately, we are creative beings. The quantum physics and the intention experiments show we are creative beings, but kind of be aware that you don't exist in a vacuum. So there's a little bit more that goes on, and there's also understanding how the healing process happens.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's obviously a lot you covered there, but I talk a lot about emotional toxicity. So not necessarily, so trauma is a big part of it, of course it is. So we're talking about all the past stuff, but exactly like you said, people need to recognize that there may be they may be sort of swimming in the sea of emotional toxicity that is actually coming from their environment and not necessarily created internally. So it's both internal stuff and external stuff. But having that awareness that is what's going on is going to obviously be the first step that you're going to take in order to resolve it, if that may be the case. And with chronic illness, how often does that happen? And you were talking about cultural prejudices and things like that towards chronic illness. This is massive because somebody could basically just go through it on a day-to-day basis and not even realizing that they're being subjected to that. So it's really important to sort of break it down, because it may not be easy for people to free themselves from those particularly cultural influences or toxic relationships for that matter. But it's going to be a very, very important element of people's recovery, isn't it? It's without it, you're just going to, chase your own tail and, go around in circles, and you could be doing everything right. You could be eating the best foods, organic foods, green juices, and you name it, and you could still be falling short. And that could be the reason why, isn't it?
It absolutely. This is what I say about sort of taking a truly holistic viewpoint. So you consider all the factors that might be, and you've got a greater degree of success if your map of reality. This is why I got involved with Ken Wilber, because he's really a philosopher and a psychologist, but his map of reality defined everything that could be affecting the human being, and you're going to have an increased chance of success if you have this wider map, this wider understanding your physical body. Obviously there are treatments that you could go on address at the biochemical level. There's your physical environment factors to consider. There's the cultural environment, which is probably the most underestimated, and even the relationship between your practitioner, your healer, and the patient. There's huge studies showing that massively impacts the outcome for the patient as well. It's another factor not to be underestimated. And yes, your own emotional states and feelings. So, but this, coming back to the connection between sort of mind and body, there's definitely, we clearly know that your stress and psychology changes the epigenetics. Stress psychology impacts the biochemistry. It also it directly impacts the nervous system. It upregulates the sympathetic and downregulates the parasympathetic side, for example, which is the healing state, the vagus nerve and the healing state. But there's also this energetic level, which means you can intervene for the psychology stuff at the energetic level as well. So essentially everything is ultimately made of energy, ultimately. I mean, this is what Einstein's formula, I've forgotten the formula now, but it's his sort of famous formula shows that really ultimately everything in matter is energy underneath, including your thoughts and feelings. So it's also very interesting to think about what trauma is. Peter Fraser, who was the founder of Ness Health, which is a bioenergetic scanning system, he would say that trauma is, as well as it being in the physical body and it leaves a biochemical imprint, is a standing wave in the field, and it's a corrupting anomaly in your field, and it's going to imbalance the information flow in the body. And what's so interesting is that many of the frontline therapies, and Eva, you'll know this, many of the frontline therapies for things like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, are energy-based psychotherapies that are based in traditional Chinese medicine, which is the understanding that we have an energy field. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is actually based in some of the Chinese medicine principles of an energy field. The hugely popular tapping things like emotional freedom technique is tapping on acupuncture points that are Chinese, the end of Chinese meridians as well. Even things like neurofeedback is where you're looking at changing the brain's waves. So they're all interventions that are at the energetic level. And it's very interesting. There's different ways that you can then do that. So there's no question that pulse electromagnetic frequency and possibly even light could change not just the biochemistry, but change how you think and feel and impact trauma to help release it. So this is where all the sort of energetic approaches have a very valid place, both not emotionally, but they're working on the energetic level, which is really fascinating. So it's more evidence. EMDR is a totally conventionally backed medical intervention, and it's the frontline therapy for PTSD, and it's as woo-woo as, as EFT and all the rest of it, if you want to categorize it in that way. So, at the deepest level, we're driven by physics. So how, the speed that we're oscillating our cells, we can if we can change the speed that we're oscillating cells, we can, or at the subatomic level, we can change our biochemistry. And amazingly, your consciousness is having an impact on that. A journey from physical illness to physical wellness isn't just a physical journey, it's an emotional journey as well, from lower state emotions to a state of well-being and joy. And those two things go together. So you're much more likely to increase chances of recovery and wellness if you're cultivating joy, enthusiasm, optimism, you feel safe in your body, you have a job that you enjoy, that you're passionate about, you have good friends and good people around you, you're living the good life, you're going to dramatically increase your chance of recovery as well. And those other things, like, you still need to do those things like physical interventions, address diet, address lifestyle, exercise. But when you bring all that together, that's when the magic starts to happen. So you start to bring in this enthusiastic part and you're engaged. If you can really realize that at some level you've created what's going on in your body and you take responsibility for it in that way, and then you bring in all the other pieces, whether it's dietary, some of the things we mentioned, circadian rhythm management, the type of water that you're drinking, all this kind of thing, this is when the magic starts to happen. It's just a lot of people get knocked off because there's healing crises along the way. They lose trust. Or they take piecemeal approaches. By setting an intention and clearing up your environment, this is where I see, and taking, you're emotionally engaged and understand that you have a profound impact on this outcome and it's up to you. That's where I've seen phenomenal recoveries in people I've worked with who've gone on to, they've been bedbound for 2 years, 8 years housebound.
Basically, the good news here, of course, is that all of this is within our reach, really, because a lot of the things that you're discussing here are actually, we have control over them. And a lot of it is almost a matter of choice. And if we need to get support with it, we can get some support with it. Maybe positive attitude and positive thinking doesn't come naturally to everybody, but it's something that you can get better at. So a lot of these things we do have a lot of control over, and obviously that's very positive in itself. What is interesting, that you look at all those modalities that fall under the umbrella of energy medicine, right? And there is an awful lot. So many people have now had this idea of trying to achieve the same thing, but perhaps in a slightly different way. So perhaps we obviously mentioned a few things already, perhaps we could actually just brainstorm on what other ways of working with the human body field, what else exists and what else, people can tap into. For instance, we did last year, I remember we talked to Eileen McCusick, and she does something that is called biofield tuning, using tuning forks. And of course, then there's sound therapy as well, homeopathy, and I was thinking about radionics as well. So there's just so many different ways of trying to achieve the same thing, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. All resonance based. So sound therapy, light therapy, pulse electromagnetic frequency type therapies, and water therapy, whether that's homeopathy or something like NEST, which is 2.0 homeopathy 2.0. And there's also what's interesting, and one thing that's again an area which I love. You can obviously you can use machines that will affect the biochemistry, the biophysics machines like low-level laser therapy and things like this. But an area that's most interesting to me is working with the energy field internally with your own subjective consciousness. Obviously, you could go and work with healers as well. Acupuncture, obviously. You could work with a therapist who's going to do EMDR, the Havening technique. They're all similar. That's all energy-based approaches. So there's actually lots of different things, and really there's no one thing that's right for everybody. It's people experimenting, and you'll find out what's right for you when you start that journey. So you might sort of not like certain therapies, but really are drawn to other types. So cranial sacral, I think is awesome. This is for the emotional health and getting to that place of joyful well-being, feeling safe, optimistic. That is necessary for people to recover. And you really want to ask yourself, like during the day, how much of the time you spend in that space. But the area that I spend a lot of time with is getting people to work with, you have an internal guidance system, which is your emotional state. And if you want to know how stressed the energy field is, what's your state of emotions? It's as simple as that, so simple. So if you're feeling very stressed, guilty, depressed, shame, if you're feeling those kinds of feelings, that's a sign the energy field's out of whack right there. And how much of your time are you living there? So really on the psychology, emotional side, my specialist area is helping people to get in touch with their feelings, because half of us are totally disconnected and we're disassociated. And then we have emotional neglect in childhood, so we don't know what we're feeling. And so you can ask me what I feel and I'll tell you what I think. And it's like, oh, yes, I had that in therapy for years. Like the therapist had to get telling me to no, I asked you what you felt. And I keep telling, because I disassociated into the mind. Lots of people do that. So really, that's becoming whole again, and it's where I focus a lot of my work, is getting people back into the body, back into the feeling sense, out of the head, which is just the rational thinking brain, which is not consciousness, by the way, because you can stop thinking and you're still aware. So consciousness is awareness. It's not the thinking brain. And that's a massive pitfall. People mix it up, thinking that's consciousness, and it's not. So, and if we want to work with this energy field directly, just tuning in to how you're feeling. And then it's about emotional mastery. And I think this is probably one of the most important things. It's where I'm going to spend more and more of my time as a therapist and a coach and a transformation coach. It's alchemizing our emotional states. How do we raise our emotions? There's nothing more important than feeling good. And how do we alchemize depression? How do we alchemize grief? How do we alchemize anxiety? How do we deal with fear? And it's understanding. I think it's my passion, is understanding what emotions mean, what the message is. And how to lift them gradually. And I have lots of different techniques. Obviously, there's EFT. I'm trained in EFT, and classical EFT, emotional freedom technique, is great to help release the negative emotions. It's a useful tool. You can use it all the time. One of the things I found missing is that it's not what about positive emotions? So I recently came across new training called Positive EFT. It's actually the work of Sylvia Hartman, who I love. And she was around one of the original EFT people who wrote about EFT and met Gary Craig. And you can actually tap in positive emotional states. So I'd like to feel happy. I'd like to feel joy. I'd like to feel safe. I'd like to feel balanced. I'd like to feel centered. And you can tap those positive emotional states and bring them in energetically. So, and as you start to do that kind of work and start tuning into, but the more you're tuned into your emotional state, you are going to become more and more empathic. You also become more sensitive, and eventually your body will respond to you because you're listening to it now. And you'll even get so tuned in that you can feel whether something's good or bad for you, whether even that's food or supplements. The body is an internal guidance system, and we're totally disconnected from it. So this is one of my most interesting areas, is getting people connected back into the emotional body, the feeling side of things, not the thinking side of things. We're a very mental society, and we've got disconnected. So once we get back into the emotional state, if you want to know the strength of your energy field, just connect into how you feel. And how do you feel most of the time? Where's your center of gravity? We know that your vagal tone increases with the higher emotional state. Absolutely scientifically proven. Higher heart rate variability. That means you're in a healing state. I could have talked all day just about stimulating the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, tons of research showing that if you stimulate the vagus nerve, it will shut off inflammation. I don't know if you've come across the neuroinflammatory reflex research. That is Dr. Kevin Tracy, where he's implanted vagus nerve stimulators and cured severe arthritis in 8 weeks. And then he repeated the experiments. They've been curing fibromyalgia with vagus nerve stimulation. So what stimulates the vagus nerve into high vagal tone, which is stimulating the healing, the rest, digest, detoxify, meditation, chanting, singing, positive social relations, gratitude journaling. You can find scientific papers on all of these things. Tai Chi, yoga, Qigong, cranial sacral therapy. All the psychotherapies have got evidence showing they increase heart rate variability. It's absolutely proven higher vagal tone it reduces inflammation. It stimulates gut healing. That if you do a traumatic brain injury on mice, they develop leaky gut within 6 hours via the vagus nerve. So when you stimulate the vagus nerve, every time you're raising your emotional state, you're stimulating the vagus nerve, and that is the healing state. And that's what they think is behind the placebo effect as well. So I think that psychology and emotions and the energetic side of health is kind of important. It's kind of fundamental to everything else you're doing. Someone said to me the other day, if you're not addressing it, it's like changing the wheels on the car and never opening the hood of the car if you're not looking at that stuff. And I was like, good analogy. Yeah, like you're changing the wheels, you may be messing around with the external, but you never actually open the hood and address the engine. So we're talking about root cause, aren't we?
Yes, indeed. And really, there's so much evidence pointing towards the same thing that we're discussing here over and over, that if you address your emotional state, everything else just falls into place. And that includes things like gut healing, because people just put so much effort and energy into healing the gut through nutrition, which they absolutely should be doing. But they could be doing that, and at the same time, the toxicity that they have internally or externally that is related to their emotional state could be continuing to damage their gut despite doing all the right things. So it needs to be the whole package. And obviously, we're still advocating good nutrition here. Both of us are nutritionists after all. But that this element that we're discussing here is just so fundamental. So I like the car analogy. That it definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Yeah. It's essentially, if you're not addressing the psychology, when you address the psychology, the emotions, and you do it, you can work with energy to do that. What you do on the biochemistry works better. You'll detox and it will work better. You'll be working on healing the gut and it will actually work. It'll actually heal. You'll be working on balancing the hormones, maybe with adrenal hormones. When you've got your psychology and the emotional side and the psychosocial aspect optimized, everything works better that you do on the biochemistry. So it's not to do it, they're saying do it, and it will actually work when you've got these other pieces in place. And that's the secret. It's a big, huge secret that people have vastly underestimated. When people are just doing functional medicine testing and all they're doing is functional medicine testing and you're not even looking into the person in front of you.
Like out of my mouth. You literally just did. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we're on the same page, right?
So to basically reinforce that what we just said, this obviously when we're talking, and this is a functional medicine approach, clearly it is the root cause approach to autoimmunity, and this talks about, everything that we covered in the previous event, really. We're talking toxicity, we're talking infections, blah, 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 diet, all of those things. And they are important, of course they are, but, in this population, people will go and do all of those other things first. And then, because people approach me and they will say things like, you know what, I've been at this healing thing for a while. I fixed my nutrition, I've detoxed, I've addressed my infections, or at least partially, because often people think they have and they haven't. But anyway, they say, I've done this, I've done that, I've done the other. I think I need to work on my emotions now because I'm still not getting better. And in the actual fact, it would really serve people to look at that first, or at least at the same time as doing those other things. And so that's what we're saying. So we're not really knocking functional medicine as such, but there is definitely, and I said that before, and I'm absolutely okay to say it again, when functional medicine, with the testing and everything that it does, it obviously has its strengths, etc. But when it's majorly deficient, is exactly in this area that we're discussing, and that is with addressing emotional factors. That is where functional medicine is majorly deficient, because all it does is it tells people that stress is going to make them worse, and therefore they have to manage their stress. But there isn't really any in-depth work in terms of trauma or any of the things that we're discussing here, never mind the energy field, right? None of this is really discussed. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yes, they pay lip service really to it. Or they would argue, some of the functional medicine people would argue, yes, we do, we address stress, and it's in the matrix, it's in the functional medicine matrix. And it's there, but it's almost symbolic, and there's so much, just trust, just love, just de-stress. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, that is, or just go do yoga in this very lip service way. That's where I get frustrated, because that's more easily said than done. And most of us have a degree of trauma. The majority of humans on this planet have some degree of emotional trauma, emotional neglect going on. And it takes skill, a degree of skill and mastery to recognize it, to understand how it's impacting us, where it's coming from. Is it external, or is it in our field, in our emotions already? And then it takes practice to master it and to release that. And it takes courage as well. And that's where the juice is. When you have a sort of experience that's been limiting, a physical illness that's been limiting your life, a true healing, a transformation needs to occur. You're not going to be the same person that you were before. And that's when you can come to the end of an illness and actually say it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It's possible to say that. You kind of get to the post-traumatic growth side, which we're all wanting to get to, which is where there's a spiritual expansion, there's a deeper meaning, there's deeper joy, there's deeper happiness. So there can be really good, deep things that come out of it.
It's interesting you're talking about post-traumatic growth. I am definitely in that camp, because had I not had me years ago and felt like I was going to die, or I was wanting to die because I felt so awful, I just couldn't function at all at some point, I would not be here right now with this curiosity and wanting to share this information with other people, but also having my own curiosity to always learn more about the healing and what human body is actually capable of. I probably wouldn't have it, or at least not to the same degree, you see. So it is a gift, because now we're here doing this thing and thousands of people are benefiting from it. So this is just one example of how you can look back and go, actually, I'm glad it happened, because it was transformational, and I wouldn't change it for anything. I had some lessons to learn, some major lessons to learn at that point in my life. And luckily, I was smart enough to learn them and not repeat them, right? Because life will give you lessons, the same lesson over and over until you've learned it, right?
And that's the other piece as well. The self-responsibility bit is that you ultimately can cut out the practitioner, because you'll learn skills that you will master and take with you, so that you won't put yourself in a position where you can get ill again because you're too aware. You're too aware about your environment. You're too tuned into your own body. You're starting to notice when things are going off. You don't leave it to the point where you develop a full-blown chronic illness. And a lot of this stuff, definitely, you can learn it. And what you learn through this healing process, you can apply it to other areas of your life as well. Some of the emotional mastery stuff, like bringing in a relationship, bringing in money, bringing in the job you want, it's actually a similar process about how you manifest those kinds of things as well. Mm-hmm. So, it is an intelligent universe that is out to support us if we just understand how it works. Yeah. So...
But I just like to sort of pick up before we finish on something that you said, and that is that when you go through this journey of healing, you transform. You are not the same person you were when you first fell ill, and that is quite interesting, because oftentimes people have this fear that remains that they will go back to where they were before. And it's very, very important to understand that it just cannot happen, because you are not the same person. You have a completely different skill set. Your knowledge has expanded, and you are in a completely different. Once you've recovered from something, you are in a completely different place, physically, emotionally, and energetically, and all of those things. So therefore, it's this fear is just a residual, of course, and for a lot of people that is a real problem, but it's actually it's not a real fear, if you know what I'm saying, because you can't possibly be in that same situation again.
Yes, totally. So that's it's the type of fear which I would describe as false evidence appearing real, which is never true. Fear has a role. It can be an instinctual guide for us. Sometimes it genuinely is doing a job for us, and we always want to listen when we have fear. But a lot of the time, it's usually just a little bit of a part of us in the past that's traumatized, that had trust wounds, that is coming up. It wants attention. It's actually trying to support us when it's coming up and niggling at us. Yeah, it's kind of the knowing yourself is really important. Like you said, no, it's not possible for me to go back. I know who I am now. And you can just gently tell that part of yourself that's in the fear that, no, I've got this. This is okay. But then that fear will actually dissolve. So, and that's what we want ultimately. So it's not possible, as you say, for people to go backwards.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I meant. And nicely put. You can't, manifest the same way. It just, But it's, and I know I went through that. Initially when you first recover, you've got that. Is this going to happen again? And a lot of people do actually experience that. But illness in itself, let's not forget, is a trauma. Particularly chronic illness, and having some people live with it for years and years and years, and that in itself is a trauma. So perhaps at that level, we need healing and support as well, so that we can truly move on, right?
Yeah, it's a huge thing that is not addressed, again, about the fact that just you're going through the whole trauma process. There's people going through an existential crisis when you lose your job, when you're losing friends because you can't go out and you can't do the things that a normal functioning person may be able to go and do. That is totally triggering trauma and triggering the kind of either the growth side or staying in a perpetual fear, crisis mode, trauma mode. So it is vital, because if you're in the trauma state, that is the worst state to be in, to perpetuate the illness. So and I think there's a significant portion of people with chronic fatigue, for example, that are stuck in that trauma of being ill, and they're actually perpetuating it purely because they're traumatized by what's happening. So, which is tragic, because they just cycle between booming and busting with their energy and constantly staying in that illness state. So it's a truly sad, tragic when people don't realize that. And you totally can retrain the brain. Go ahead and pick up the information and run with it. However you're going to do that, whether it's a therapy that you go and address, or like go for it. You know, the universe is out to support you if you just know how to work with it. So
and oftentimes it takes that one little step to start off with, just one little step. Don't think about what you're doing for the next few months or few years or whatever. Just take that first step, whatever that may be, whether it's looking up one of the modalities we discussed, or whether it's looking up a practitioner to work with, or whatever it may be. Just take that one little, small, tiny step today, and things will just start snowballing from there. So that's everybody's homework from this session. Just pick something that resonates and just action it. I always say, well, actually, it wasn't obviously me who said that, but only action changes things. So we need to
Yes. So you've got to put this into practice, the diligence about whatever it may be, whether you want to learn EFT, whether, you know, if you think you've got emotional trauma in childhood that could be a factor, you know, start to explore that process and take the steps, and you won't regret it.
No, it's actually, it always turns out to be a fascinating journey, and you learn so much through it. So all of these things need to come together. The physical, the emotional, and the energetic, and that's when we get the best results. So hopefully everybody got that message. And so I wanted to ask you before we finish, is there anything that you wanted to share with people, perhaps currently what you're up to? I know you've got your membership site coming up and things like that. So
sure. So people can stay in touch with me just by going to my website, which is nikigratrix.com. I am launching a podcast shortly where I've got people from all the different sort of aspects we talked about. So psychology, energetic, physical. I've got mold experts. I've got, you know, psychiatrists, got, you know, the whole kind of plethora. And I've got some exciting sort of launches coming up, so the podcast and a membership site where we'll be exploring all this from an abundant energy health point of view as well. So if people want to stay in touch, just go to my website. There's a free guide to abundant health and energy on there, and you can stay on my newsletter for now.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Nikki. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always. And thank you for everything that you've contributed and that you've shared. And it's been a fascinating conversation. And I really hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Eva, for having me. I love everything that you do. Really happy to support it. And this whole project is so important. So, you know, I honour you for doing that as well. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.